Hi there and welcome to Soundpaint. My name is Troels. This video is an Adastra scoring walkthrough. I've written an insane 8-minute piece with these gorgeous strings, and really it's just trying to demonstrate all the different sides of the libraries, from the glorious arcs to the beautiful and expressive sustains. It's strangely intimidating sometimes to record these videos here because certain sample projects are very personal. Adastra is probably the most personal sample project I've ever embarked on, and it's the product of almost a decade of research and retakes and learning about samples, but most of all, learning about human emotion. I don't know about you, but for me, I've bought so many libraries over the years, so many string libraries with glorious promises, that when I sit in front of the keys, I can command a full string ensemble with all their emotion and richness that a real string ensemble can offer. And too many times I've been let down. When you are in sample sessions, you have to record with emotion. And as you can imagine, sample sessions can be very static because you have to record every single note the orchestra can possibly do. In this case here, both violins, violas, cellos, basses recorded as separate sections, so you have full control over them, and then the ability to put them together, as we're going to demonstrate in this video here. This track was actually written as a short note demo for violins, but it turned out to become a full-fledged demo, really sort of broadcasting the whole width and depth of this beautiful library, whether it's the arcs, whether it's the wealth of short notes, whether it's the sustains that to me almost work as well as legato themselves, because I have 127 different velocity layers of expression on the mod wheel. It's just a whole different ball game when it comes to expression. Let me show you what it can do inside of the DAW, just playing the demo right out of the box. This entire track was written 100% organically with Soundpaint. I can just do things here that I've never been able to do before, and I can't wait to show you, because we're no longer chained to the technology. Soundpaint allows me to do things I've never been able to before, and it truly feels like every time I press a key that I'm almost touching the string of a violin or a cello or the other instruments. It's really hard to explain, but it's an incredibly emotional experience, and to me it fulfills the promise that Colin and I made each other many years ago, which was to find the holy grail in string sampling. I think this library at least touches upon that in several places. One thing I love about demos, to me, this has always been the tradition of making demos. You remember the old radio stations you could sort of dial through and get into different channels? It feels like that. You're just trying to showcase the libraries from so many different sides. And it's just such a fun process and such a unique way of writing music, because I can just change whenever I get tired or impatient. And Lord, am I impatient in this demo here. Let's take it from the beginning here. I'm playing with the arcs. The arcs are doing something that you just cannot do with sustains and with any other means. Even though we have the best sustains I've ever tried, you can get very close. There is just something to these arcs here. The first minute or so in the track begins with the violins playing concertino. Concertino means with mutes on the strings. And these are arcs with mutes. It just has that most beautiful silky sound that I would much rather just play like here and not having to worry about mod wheel, whatever. This just feels right. And when I play them, I never play to a metronome when I do this kind of stuff. I really try to hear what is the sample telling me. But as I mentioned, this is a violin demo, so what you're hearing at the beginning is not basses and cellos or violas, it's actually violins playing as basses. Check out what happens when I play them down here. An unusually low violin, and down here you can play it as a bass as well. That's violins with mutes on them. What we're doing in Soundpaint is that every single instrument has infinite range on the keyboard, so you can play all instruments outside or inside their natural playing range. Because the violin has so much tension, so much vibration on the high strings, when you take them down, the note is very stable, almost more stable than a bass. You can hear basses sometimes get a little bit detuned, but this thing here, that's pretty tight pitch. Let me go to the next section here as well, and I'm adding a little bit here. One thing I love to do is to play the arcs and then do tremolos on top of them. It just gives this beautiful sort of almost fragile, unstable shine. Now, you may have noticed on that very last note that it started bending. Also for me, like when I work with a computer, like I don't have to treat the orchestra exactly how I normally would. This is just a tremolo being pitch bent down. You'll notice here on the pitch bender here, it just gives a cool vibe. You'll notice as well, when you look at the CC data here, that for example, with these guys here, that I'm using the mod wheel very, very delicately to really feel I'm there. So when I write here for stuff like this, it's all about just how I feel. I mean, it's so simple when you see what's going on here. It's just a single note playing up and down. But I'll just sit and feel it and really listen to what would it feel like with a real section? What would the tremolos be doing? How would they be perfect? Now, it helps when you have a great supplement. In this other section here, I also add a little bit of extra bass coming from a Juno 60. There's a particular program that I made called Soft Film Bass that I highly recommend. It's like the warmest, most filmy bass of all time. It may not sound like a lot on its own, but when you put it in context, all of a sudden you get that massive sort of subwoof bottom, but keep it very, very low in your mixes. Don't go high on them. Just have them subtly where you can slightly hear them. It's important you can hear them. You don't want underneath that range. Let them be in there, but as a very, very soft, velvety couch that you can just lean your music back into, but not overwhelming. And if you notice here, like things are coming a little bit late all the time. For me, that's just what happened. If I was conducting a piece like this, I would give time and space enough for the notes to breathe emotionally and sort of weave in and out of existence. So when I play this way here is also an emotional process for me. I sort of wait a little bit and try to be patient. And I often like to breathe when I'm composing as well, trying to sort of what feels right in terms of the breadth of the music as well. Now, there are two other notable supplements in this part here. First, our beautiful harp ensemble, which I love so much in Soundpaint. It's a 4-piece harp ensemble that we recorded in the beautiful hall of Slin. It just has this magical sound to it. I wouldn't want to have it any other way. When you have 4 harps, just like when you have 7 glockenspiels, you get a richer body, a more full sound. And when you combine the harp ensemble with the glockenspiel ensemble, let me just isolate them here, you get something really pretty. So there's a couple of things going on. The harp is just sort of playing its chord arpeggiations, but the glockenspiels are almost doing sort of an answer and a call response here. For example, that last note here, you can just hear I'm waiting. That's what I'm talking about when it comes to the breathing of the music. That's also why I never work on the grid with these things here. Don't have any metronomes, anything like that. This is not rhythmic music in that sense. This is flow state. So any form of rhythmic element for me sort of just takes me out of that. So just score with your heart, score with your ear. You'll notice here that I'm massaging the CC a little bit on the modulation side, my mod wheel here, just to sort of create that sort of swelling expression. For example, here in the last chord here, you notice sort of goes down and then it sort of swells into when the music opens up a little bit. More rise. And I actually think I wrote this part here first. This is an example of what you can do with the short notes here, almost synthesizing them at times. One thing I love about Soundpaint is that I'm no longer sort of step bound by the samples like I am in Kontakt, for example. I can easily make them acoustic and then sort of slowly take those acoustics and shape them into something new and then go back to acoustics. I have an old vintage 808 here, and The 808 in Soundpaint, which is one of my favorite libraries of all time, really is an 808. Well, it's actually 25 different 808s because I sampled 25 different 808s through different circuitry. But the hi-hat alone that we're listening to right now was sampled over 1,000 times to teach the engine all the beautiful aspects of analog goodness. And when you listen to it here, it's not a static hi-hat that you're used to with digital things. This is what a real analog sounds like. You hear it? There's small imperfections in the sound. That's what you get out of these old vintage machines. And of course, the sound itself is just so gorgeous. This is, in my opinion, the best hi-hat sound ever created. It's clear in the mix. It's not hard on the ear. It's very rhythmic, but it's just a pleasant sound. You know, we talk about strings and the perfection and the beauty of that, but even down at a hi-hat level, there is such a thing as an almost Stradivarius of hi-hats. This would be it. And I think there are many, many reasons, some tangible and some in the abstract, for the fact that this hi-hat is still the prevailing hi-hat in most top 40 music today, EDM in particular. Like, it's just not going to go anywhere because they really just got it right that one time. I just think it's an incredible appreciation even for the short notes, you know? We were talking about the 808. And for me, that is the golden machine when it comes to like analog drum machines. There's only one machine I've heard so far, which we also have in Soundpaint, that might be matching the 808, but in a different way. And that's the Red 522. It was designed to modernize the 808. And out of the thousands of attempts to surpass the 808, this is the first time I heard something that is up there. It truly is a modern 808. Let me just isolate it alone here. And of course, the beautiful Glockenspiel ensemble is playing behind all of this all the time. I just love this so much, and it creates that sort of beautiful bell-like angelic sound on top of the mix. There's also this cool little funky bass in the background, very analog too. Now, who would have known that a bass like that would go together with a harp ensemble, a glockenspiel ensemble, some 808 drums, and some drum machines for the 522? But this is actually a good example of the marriage between deep sampled analog instruments and really an appreciation of acoustics. Putting them together, you can really just appreciate like, oh, the analog has the warmth, the natural variation. Every time I play a note, it's not the same. Doing exactly the same in the acoustic realm, using real halls. So an enormous amount of attention to detail, but when it all comes together, just like when you're cooking, if you have great ingredients, the likelihood of your meals being really delicious or sounding good in this case here are just a little bit higher. So for me, I love working with the highest grade sonic ingredients. It just gets me there a little bit quicker from a production point of view. But these are just the violins playing spiccatos, so very sort of feathery, bouncy bow motions. Now, there's a lot going on in this part here. I remember the first part I created was these Bartok sort of arps and sort of playing with them again in terms of bending, whether they're acoustic or hybrid or natural or supernatural. They don't sound completely natural, and the ear might go like, wait, that's not a Bartok, like that sounds like something was chopped off, and it is. I'm using the offset button here and I'm modulating it so I can control how much offset I have on them here. So if we go down here, they're gonna sound more natural. But I felt that was kind of a little bit too sort of messy production-wise, so I wanted to tighten them up. And because there's so many notes and it's a full ensemble playing each of those notes, using the offset could give me a cleaner sound, and I actually like this more. And if you listen to that part here, you'll notice that I'm gradually modulating the Bartoks here by using the detail knob here in the offset rack here. If you ever want to do this, just go into the racks here and open offset, and then that will give you that control. And if you ever want to control that with your mod wheel, you can just right click here, say add MIDI CC automation, and then move whatever controller. I'm moving my mod wheel right now, and now I can control it fully. Try to follow it down here when I'm playing this next piece here. You'll see how I'm gradually sort of loosening them up to their natural state as a part of the expression. This is Bartok expression. And sort of slowly letting go. Now, you probably listen to a variety of sort of weird, unique, like boo kind of sounds. Those are hybrid sounds coming from our extensive hybrid cinematic catalog inside of Soundpaint. So for example, here we have a long falls, sort of dropping motion sound. Down here is a category I invented some years ago called star falls. These are sort of higher pitched sounds, but I just imagine sort of a slow motion glass lake of stars sort of slowly moving over it, and what that would sound like. I sort of try to be poetic when we create sound design. It brings me to beautiful places. I love these ones here. And downers, a category I coined like over a decade ago. And of course, risers as well. Did you hear that? The bending French horn. So I took an arc here from our cage library inside of Soundpaint and then did this. And to me, that's just adding that additional little bit expression. So, all right, I could have a French horn arc and it could just play its note here, but I can bend it. I'm inside of the computer. I can do whatever I want. A little bit of violin spiccato love sprinkle on top. You know, it's strange to say this, but I have to just make the Juno stand out a little bit on his own right here, because this is my favorite instrument in this particular section of the demo here. 3 Juno 60s playing together, all ultra deep sampled. And one of the things I love most in Soundpaint when it comes to vintage synthesis is that these units are nearly impossible to capture, but we've actually figured out how to get the true souls out of them. So when I'm sitting with the Juno here, I know I never have to turn it on in the real world. I've captured the sonic soul. We've ghost busted this thing into the machine. So I can now command 3 Juno 60s, at my leisure. In my opinion, we can try all day long to build software that's trying to emulate it. But in our case here, I'm like, why don't we just record the real deal? When we ultra deep sample synthesizers, one of the reasons it sounds so good is that for every step of the arpeggiator, when it plays through all these beautiful figures here, there are new samples generated, truly like an analog. The legendary Bob Moog spoke of this as a phenomena of being able to feel the electrons pass through the circuitry. And we paid a lot of attention to deep sampling emotions inside of Adastra, but we also do it with synthesizers. And again, when it all comes together, when you all have these best ingredients and a true appreciation of each instrument, and perhaps a humble way of approaching them as well, because they're all masterpieces in the instrument design, like it all just comes together in a sweet way. so the bass has been sort of playing orderly throughout the piece. I just felt at that point in the composition there was enough air. Things were sort of just moving, but there was enough sort of air in the mix to allow for a little bit of a solo in there. Nothing great, but just someone showing off a little bit in the background, like, I got it too. And then the unmistakable sound of a cymbalom ensemble. So we have a harp ensemble, we have a glockenspiel ensemble, and we have a cymbalom ensemble playing underneath the beautiful Adastra ensembles and all the analog drum machines and synthesizers. What a glorious fest. For me, when I introduce a new element like this, it has to be pristine. It has to come from somewhere like deeply sincere. And it also has to be proud and brave in the mix. So there's no doubt cymbalom has arrived. And behind that, we have the Bartok arpeggiation playing again. And pizzicatos. But underneath all of it, there's this kick-ass sort of swelling bass. And this for me was probably the biggest surprise when it came to really understanding the power of Soundpaint and what it does to string instruments. So these are just pizzicato notes, but they're played well below the natural range of the violin here. Try to hear them isolated. That's just the coolest sound. And when you hear in context here, you will notice it underneath, just creating this sort of swelling motion, particularly here in the beginning, actually. But it's not just that this program here, which is just a single part, can do the growling and play unique basses. It can also do the opposite in the high range here. Let me try to trigger the sequence here. You'll notice here on the modulation that is moving up here, again, using the offset feature here. And sort of just imagine how we are morphing from natural sort of states of the instrument into more supernatural and then back to the sort of natural state again. It's where the orchestra becomes truly hybrid. I humbly have to state that I think for me, I need to redefine the way I think about hybrid. Like, this is sort of the right way of doing hybrid. It's not just unique sounds, it's taking and bending very traditional acoustics into something new. So this almost sounds like a synthesizer at times, and then back to sounding like a full string ensemble. It's my firm belief, just like we talked about with the ingredients, that if I cook well, not just having good ingredients, but if I cook respectfully with them, for example, use area articulation to express myself a little more, then the totality of that painting will be a little more detailed and one can just hear and appreciate that attention to detail. These are really good playable marcatos. When we recorded them, think of like intention in the note. Even when it's a short note, you can still have attitude as a player. You can still be there emotionally. That's what we got here. So these are not static marcatos. Da. There's a little bit of a swoop on the end of the sound and then a little more grind on the attack, though we have the many velocities as well. These are emotional marcatos, if you will. And in context. And I think like the more time I've used in the box, the more time I've learned to appreciate acoustic instruments, which I really think are the instruments of the future, and the computer is just playing catch up right now. So to really appreciate them, every single instrument at the same level with a humble nature, and understand that the real world is infinitely complex, and while AIs and many other tools are slowly scratching on the doors of reality, there's nothing like holding a real instrument in your hand, being able to touch the strings and feel life vibrate through it. So that's in many ways what we're trying to do inside of Soundpaint as well. And the Bartok ARP is still running through. It was sort of by accident, but this thing actually runs through most of the piece here. Let me just add a few more strings so you can hear the strings isolated. So we had the violins earlier playing basses, but in this case here, I added cellos and basses, but I actually played the basses outside their natural range as well. So we have subwoof basses on top. So that's why it's a very bass-rich piece. That's a real bass. Beautiful, right? You can hear the hall in the sound. This is one out of many reasons that Colin and I like to record in real halls. You get such beautiful, natural imperfection in the sound every time you play. It's a new sound generated, which is also one of the beautiful things about Soundpaint. We virtually have, in many cases, infinite round robin in our samples as well. It's really just like more musical sweetness. So as you get familiar with Soundpaint, one will realize that all instruments live together. So it's very easy to pair unusual sound sources together. For example, here, I took the spiccatos of the violins. I used the offset so they got a more sort of synthetic flavor. And then I added a Juno 60 ARP. Let me just isolate that too. And then I coupled or married the two. Just the perfect like arpeggiation sound, but again with more natural acoustic sources inside of it. So, well, the analog is natural and acoustic as well. So it's just coming from two different worlds, the analog reality and the analog synthesis, I suppose we can call it. So for me, this is also sort of sound color, sound painting. I like to sometimes have fireworks in my music, so unique little things that happens that are not really related to the music, but helps create that tension and explosion in the music. I play these things super loosely, but it gives this sort of extra shine. Let me try to remove it and then add it afterwards. And with it. And it's the same exercise over and over of adding these little elements to sort of spice it up all the time. For example, I added this crazy sound here last minute just to give a little extra sort of power to it. Let me try to remove this one and then add it. You would imagine that mix couldn't take any more, but I thought this one was pretty cool on top. The 1975, my favorite jazz guitar that we've sampled so far. We're actually working on a new version of it if it wasn't good enough. I really, really love this one for soloing. And it can stand on its own. This is the benefit of having 127 dynamics on every single key in Soundpaint, which is very unique to the Soundpaint technology. We are real-time rendering the samples. It allows you to play like this. Like, to me, that sounds like a real guitar. You know, just so much life in it. And you'll notice here on the pitch bend as well that I'm gracefully using it just like I would with a real guitar. And one thing to consider when we are making mock-ups and putting time into production is like to appreciate the acoustic world. And also a shout out to our Majestic Percussion, which is a 20-piece percussion ensemble playing orchestral percussion, lying in the background and sort of providing. It's amazing how many ensembles we have, glockenspiel ensembles, but of course we also have like deep percussion ensembles. So you'll notice here in the sequence that everything is played in hand. It's not super precise. I missed a note here. But that's what happens in reality. Sometimes the percussionist just misses a hit, you know. So as long as you try to make up for it, it's actually okay, and it can help the composition a little bit. Once you hear it in context of the music, it's... And even down to something like a snare, one can still sort of put some snare love in it. Like how cool you get to roll and then go like do-do-do-do. And in this case here, the snare is also tuned to the tune of the music. So that's also something in Soundpaint. I realized when I was tuning the timpanis that the snares have enough tonality in them as well, where you can actually make tonal snares, if you will. In this part here, I don't know why, but I was thinking back to some of Shostakovich's old symphonies and sort of just having that sort of unique melodic thing that is going in a different direction. I have no idea what the chords are called or anything like that. It just sounded right to my ear in terms of being a little bit contrastful to the somewhat otherwise harmonic composition. And you can also hear in itself, it sounds really alive, but the notes are not always super precise. I added a flute to that as well. And in context. And this is also a part where, like, did I really need to write a whole bass section for that? And it's like, yeah, I kind of did. Like, it's been a little bit like lying in its groove, playing its melody, but it also shows that the rest of the orchestra is equally invested. And this was, by some magical composer's mind, really deliberately written for all parts of the orchestra. This last section here is playing violins and violas and cellos in spiccato fashion. So when I write on the grid and quantize, I'll always do this thing. I go in here, I highlight it, and then I find my humanize function. All DAWs will have this. It will randomly play around with the notes a little bit so they're not completely on the grid, and you can control to what amount you want that. It just helps shake everything up. And then I play loosely with other instruments like glockenspiels and others will be played in hand. And that sort of gives that sort of tight feeling and yet musical. And of course, I had to spice it up with yet another ensemble. So in this case here, I'm using our xylophone ensemble on top of all of it. And harp ensemble. And the glockenspiel ensemble, if you notice here, the notes not totally being on the grid here. all just played in hand, you know. And then additional bass support coming from the 522. You wouldn't imagine there'd be a drum machine in this part here, but there is. And yes, the Bartok ARP is playing in the background here as well. It's kind of wild. Not the prettiest thing on its own, but I just like that sort of sound of a lot of players playing, and it's a little hard to hear what's what, but it's just a gorgeous sound. So even though we just humanized everything, I just felt these guys here. Let me just try to remove them. Let's listen without. It's nice, but with them, it's just a little more alive, I think. And uniquely enough, the bass is coming from a pizzicato played with a violin coupled together with a Juno 60. Well outside the natural playing range of the violin. It's just a crazy thing you can do. And then the whole thing just ends with a gentle arc. I want to say that this demo took me about a week to write, fairly extensively, and really putting hours into it every day. And for me, I realized when I was done with it, and I spent about like 30, maybe 40% of my time mixing. So when I'm done with a composition, I'll go back to it many, many times. I've listened over 100 times to this composition. I have 55 different renders of it. I'm just going through all the different iterations and just listen to it in the car and, oh, I don't like what it's doing there, and just work on the mix. For me, mixing is super important about composition, something we don't talk about enough. It's really a part of the toolkit for the ear. We can't create these unique castles here if we don't know how to build the foundation. Anyway, I hope this was a little bit of an intro into Adastra, or at least one way of using it. We have other tutorials also demonstrating the strings from many, many other points of view. We have tutorials where we go through the individual articulations, the legatos, the sustains, and all that stuff. There are many things I haven't covered in this video, but I want to say that maybe my favorite articulation is the non-vibrato to vibrato sustains on the keyboard here. I didn't use legato in this demo here because I never felt I needed it. It's just sometimes the sustains in the library are so good. I use them maybe 60% of the time that I can really just do what I want with them. I can do arcs as well for that matter. But sometimes, as you can see in this demo and the other tutorials, like, you do need to use legato and arcs and all the beautiful other parts of Adastra. I hope this has given you a little bit of an insight into how to score as well. As I mentioned, my approach is very unconventional. I don't have schooling. I didn't have a teacher teaching me how this works. So it's purely an exercise of the ear and the heart for me. And I always think about like how unique it is when you spell out the word heart, that the ear lives inside of it.